As authors, we strive to create a vivid mental picture for our readers so they can fully experience our stories. But getting more specific doesn't necessarily mean adding more words. Today, I want to talk about active voice and word choice, how to get specific. Sometimes to get specific, you need to make better word choices, not add more phrases to your descriptions. This often means looking at your verb choices and your descriptors. This is Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping authors like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers, because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. Let's start with choosing descriptive verbs. Verbs are the action part of a sentence. The verb is what happens, or what action is performed. Sometimes the verb you're using is not as specific as you need it to be. So here's an example. The bunny moved away. In this sentence, moved is the verb. Moved does convey some specific information. We know that some sort of movement has occurred, but not how fast or in what direction or other details. If we change the verb moved to something else, we get more specific, more detailed. So, the bunny hopped away. Hopping is a specific type of movement, one readers can easily picture. Now a reader knows the bunny moved up and down and away from the characters or events of the story, at a somewhat leisurely pace. If they'd been moving faster, we might have used the verb leapt or jumped instead of hopped. So that's an example of verbs and how they can be specific or not too specific. Choosing your verbs carefully is particularly important when it comes to things like body language and facial expressions. So a smile conveys happiness, but a smirk conveys a different kind of happiness. It has some sort of triumphant undertones to it. Same thing, if I slam my book down on the table, that conveys anger or frustration. Whereas if I toss my book onto the table, that doesn't convey those emotions. Instead, it conveys a lack of caring about that property. When you select descriptive verbs like these, you don't have to state how your characters are feeling. You are showing their feelings and their thoughts through the specific actions they are performing. Choosing more specific verbs can also help you eliminate adverbs. Sometimes you'll find yourself using phrasing that requires you to modify your verbs because they aren't specific enough. Instead of doing that, you can just use a different verb. So if I say I walked quietly, you know that I was moving at a slower pace and I was trying not to make a lot of sound. That takes 3 words. I could also say I tiptoed. Now we've eliminated 1 word, so we've tightened the sentence, and we've conveyed more information. Tiptoeing happens at a similar pace to walking, so they're both slow movements. It also implies trying not to create sound, which is where that quietly adverb comes in. But tiptoeing also says I was walking on the balls of my feet, and I was probably sneaking or trying not to call attention to myself. So by using a different verb instead of modifying the weak one, walking, then I was able to convey even more information and tighten my prose. So I got more specific without having to add more words. The verbs you choose to use convey so many different things. They can show speed, direction, emotion, intent, and more. So if you find people saying your descriptions are weak or hard to picture, look at your verbs before you add a whole bunch of new words and see if you're making the best and smartest word choices for your specific piece. Similarly, Next, I want to talk about what is active voice. Active, in this context, doesn't mean violent. It means that the subject of the sentence is the one performing the action. Instead of being acted upon, it's actively participating in the sentence and in the story. Here's an example of what that looks like. Michelle scarfed the whole chocolate cake. Here, Michelle is the one doing the scarfing. She is active in this sentence. Scarfed is also a very specific way of eating. It implies it was quick and intense and involved taking large mouthfuls and just trying to devour it as quickly as possible. I could have said that same thing passively. Passive voice is when the subject of the sentence is being acted upon. They're not actively participating. So, the whole chocolate cake was scarfed by Michelle is passive because the whole chocolate cake is not performing the scarfing action. It's the one being acted upon. Active voice is another way you can both tighten your prose and get more specific. When you use active voice instead of passive voice, you create more specific, detailed mental images for your readers, and you also speed up the pace of your story and reveal more about your characters. When you use active voice, you eliminate empty words like was and to be, because those words don't mean anything until they are placed in the context of a sentence. That's what I mean by empty. By flipping the sentence around, you eliminate those empty words and you make it more active. This also pulls the reader in closer to the action because words like was kind of create a bit of distance between the action that's happening and the reader's experience of it. So when you eliminate those words, it's more immediate and therefore it's easier for your reader to picture. One place in particular you want to watch out for passive voice and switch it to active is when you are describing your setting. Settings are a little bit passive by nature sometimes, so it can be really easy to say things like the walls were white except for the one picture, instead of saying one picture hung on the white walls. So look at your setting verbs and how you're describing it to see if you need to make better, more descriptive verb choices. Next, I want to talk about picking descriptive adjectives. Like verbs, adjectives should be as specific and detailed as possible. So if you're going to modify a description by adding an adjective, make sure you're picking the best modifier you can for that sentence. But if you find yourself using a lot of adjectives, that could be because you are not making the best word choices. Your other words are not specific enough. That means you need to pick more specific words so you can eliminate some unnecessary ones and create a more vivid mental picture. However, you shouldn't be too concerned with cutting words if it negatively impacts your descriptions. One type of adjective that can benefit from more words is colors. Instead of saying something like dark gray, I could get specific by saying heather gray. Uses the same amount of words, but it's a bit more specific. Or I could compare that color to a similarly colored object that most readers are familiar with. If I wanted to describe lipstick, I might say raspberry red instead of a bright bubbly red. Raspberry red is a more specific color. Or if I'm describing a character's eye colors, I might say that they're the color of summer grass. That's way more specific than me trying to describe a specific shade of dark green. Yes, it does take more words than just saying green, but in this case, it creates a more specific, vivid mental picture, so it's worth it. So what I'm saying is don't sacrifice good description for some arbitrary word count, but do try and keep your prose tight and use the most specific, detailed words you can come up with. Now I want to share an editor's advice for choosing verbs, adjectives, and active voice. The words that first come to your mind when you are writing are going to be influenced by your specific life experience, your education, your hobbies, your culture, your society, so many other things. And you should let that happen. That is a part of your unique author voice. But after you are finished writing, go back and take a second look at your word choice to make sure you're using the best, most specific words to convey what you're trying to convey. So this doesn't mean changing your voice, it just means clarifying and getting more specific. Are you choosing descriptive verbs, or is everyone simply moving? Are you using active voice, or are you using too much passive voice and your story is too slow because of it? What about your adjectives? Are they the best ones you can come up with? When you are looking at word choice like this, I recommend having a synonym finder somewhere nearby. I prefer to have a physical copy. You can get these at thrift stores and used bookstores for inexpensive prices. Because when I have a physical book, I don't slip into the internet rabbit hole. When you use a synonym finder or something like a thesaurus, you can look up the word that you might be overusing or that's not specific enough and find synonyms that have a stronger emotional connotation or that provide more information and you just like the sound of better. Over time, this will even expand your vocabulary as an author, which will help you be more specific while you're drafting so you don't have to spend as much time revising. But when you're first learning, don't worry about word choice until after you have written your first draft and you've nailed your story's structure. So what type of bland verbs do you tend to use and have to go back and change? When I first started writing, all of my characters were stepping forward or backward, so I had to learn other ways to convey aggression and fear. Now my characters rarely step because that's not very specific. For more videos on word choice, sentence structure, and other aspects of writing, subscribe to Ignited Ink Writing, a channel dedicated to helping authors like you transform your writing so it lingers with your readers. Because writing that lingers gets remembered and recommended to others. I'm Caitlin Burvey, editor and writer. To find out more about me, go to www.ignitedinkwriting.com. There you will also find a synonym worksheet, which will help you learn how to use synonyms and word choice to create your authorial and character voices. And now it's your turn to use descriptive, active verbs, adverbs, and adjectives to tighten your prose, keep your story moving, create vivid mental pictures for your readers, and ignite your ink.